Welcome to Health, Wellbeing and Lifestyle, where professionals in the field inform, educate and inspire the community to be healthier, more balanced and live the lifestyle they love. Today in the studio we have Carolyn Pope, who is an animal communicator and therapist, and today we're going to be discussing animal global awareness, myth or truth. Hi Carolyn and welcome.
Hey, how you doing?
Pretty good. So can you tell us, is there animal global awareness? Is it true?
Absolutely it is, yeah. We have the internet, animals have the internet, and in the same way on Messenger, you can see someone's on there, but you don't want to talk to them. They can ignore you or other animals, or they can choose to communicate. And all animals are aware. The geese that fly from north to south and vice versa will literally spread the news. It's almost like in the old days when we only had the telegraph. Animals have always had it. We like to think that we're so superior, and yet the technology, in inverted commas, that they've always known what's gone on in other sections of the world. We're just a little slower to catch up.
Can you please give me some examples of what this is and how it works?
They have thought in exactly the same way we do, and it's the telepathics. I remember on September 11, I was staying at a mate's place, went down later that day to my horse, just looked at him and said, "Do you know about it?" And he said to me, "Yes, we all know about it. We just can't understand it. Can you explain it?" No, not really. But every animal on the planet, because you think how much that was broadcast across. Some of them will have picked up the people in the planes. Some of them will have picked up the pets and pet dogs, pet cats that saw it. The birds will have seen it. And it goes out in the same way it did on our television screens. They know and they understand. Another client of mine was going to Hawaii, and she was doing a communication to make sure the animals knew she'd be back and all those sorts of things. And the cat actually said to her, "Be careful. There's going to be an earthquake." First night at the pub, she's happily half tanked and telling everybody, and they were giving it to her for the rest of the trip. Oh, the earthquake. Day before they were due to leave, guess what there was? A large earthquake. She said it was such a shame it wasn't the second day because everyone was buying a drink. She could have had a lovely week. But the animals know so much more than we do. And a friend of mine's cockatoo, when we had that earthquake in Melbourne earlier this year, I think it was, or late last year, that was the strongest one we'd had in quite a while. Apparently half an hour before, he's turned around and gone, "Batten down the hatches. There's going to be an earthquake and it's going to be a big one." Sure enough, there was. So they know long before we do. They sense the energy of the earth and they all communicate because they feel it. I mean, you see all the pictures of the elephants heading up before the earthquakes or the tsunamis. Animals have this inbuilt knowledge. It's us humans that are left behind. We really like to think we're so all over it. We are so incredibly isolated from the rest of creation. We really are. And any animal can tune in to any other animal or person anywhere in the world and know what's going on. Friend of mine's cockatoo, it literally saved my life one day. I was really tired, mountain road. I was on my way home. I knew the road well, but it was one that a lot of people had killed themselves on. And he just said to me, "Slow down, look at your speedo." And I was doing 30k faster than I thought I was. If I'd hit that bend, it wouldn't have been pretty. And this is the thing, we are all connected. We forget that in the age that we're in now. You go back 100 years, 200 years, 1,000 years. We were much more interconnected, not only with ourselves, because we needed the community to survive. We weren't isolated. We all lived together. Go back, particularly Europe where there's snow, the animals lived in with you because otherwise they'd all die of cold, as we would have. You got to know the animals intimately on a bunch of levels that most people don't today. And we were connected. It mattered what they did. If they couldn't work or they were exhibiting signs of soreness, it mattered if they were a working animal. It mattered with the crops because if your crops failed, you starved to death. These days we go to the supermarket, we don't think twice. We've become so disconnected. But often, particularly before a large weather event, for example, the animals would let you know. And even today, if it's going to be a really hot summer, the animals will all drop their coat a lot earlier. Then the people would know, oh, okay, we're going to be heading towards a hot summer, or vice versa, cold, wet winter. The animals start growing their coat 2 months earlier. The farmers would know and would try and stock up. We were interconnected. We've lost all of that, or most of that. Some rural areas still have it, but very few. And, these days, the most we do with weather is flip up our phone and look at the weather app. We don't even walk and look outside or know what to do. They used to look at the animals and work out. Quite often, that would be as good or better a weather barometer as listening to the Melbourne Bureau.
And if your animal is behaving oddly, what would be your advice?
There's always, always, always a reason. You need to find it. And don't wait. Don't let it drag out. If your animal's acting oddly, animal therapist, vet, and you may well find, yes, it may well be a massive thunderstorm. A lot of dogs will pace. One of mine used to know any sort of atmospheric pressure he struggled with. So 2 days before a storm, he could be bad. It was really unpleasant for him, poor little guy. But they know, you may find it's an earthquake, but often it's pain. Oddly, there's always a reason, but most times animals will be odd, is pain. So always, always get them checked by a health care professional as soon as you possibly can.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. It's been a pleasure. If you want to know more about Carolyn Pope and Animal Global Awareness, go to her webpage on our website at healthwellbeingandlifestyle.com.au, and please stay tuned. We've got another fantastic guest coming after the break.
Stay tuned. After the break, urban food specialist Marc Noyce is talking about innovative systems that make gardening easier. Welcome back. Our second guest today is urban food specialist Marc Noyce, and the topic we'll be discussing is innovative systems that make gardening easier. Welcome, Marc.
Hi, Megan. Thank you very much for having me.
Gardening's come a long way. What are some of the latest trends?
Well, let's look at where gardening came from. Where we grew plants in broad acre farming, which we still do. We've been doing that for thousands of years, and it's got us to where we are today, which is fantastic. But most of our population lives in urban cities. We live near the coast, and we congregate in an urban jungle, basically. And we don't have access to those same broadacre farms. We're actually building over our traditional food bowls as fast as humanly possible. So here in Melbourne, for example, our food comes more than 100 kilometres from where we're sitting right now, every day of the week. So we've got to bring in food now from a long distance, and in some cases, some of our food travels thousands of kilometres to get to it. We call that food miles. What we're trying to do is turn food miles into food metres by growing our own food in our backyard or on our balcony. So food has come a long way in terms of how we grow. There are lots of different ways to grow food, and some of the challenges are, how do we do that in an urban environment?
Marc, you've talked about the wicking garden beds a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit more about those?
So a wicking garden bed is not just like a garden bed in your backyard or a pot, for example. In your backyard, you might have a raised garden bed. It might just be at soil level where you grow some food. You put water on there, and quite often that water just goes straight through the garden bed, past the roots, and you're actually watering next door neighbour's trees instead. You put your nutrients on there. You buy some nutrients from the hardware store or the supermarket, and you pour those nutrients on, and they again go straight past your plants, your seedlings, and make your next door neighbour's trees look really fantastic. Gets into the groundwater and it's gone. In a pot, for example, where you pour water on there, it just goes down the sides and you think you've watered your pot, but if you actually break that apart, you'll find that it's really dry. And because when potting mix dries out, it doesn't attract water anymore. So what we want to do is we want to try to hold that water in the pot. So self-watering pots are just a really fantastic way of having a water reservoir in the bottom of the pot and allowing that water to rise up through the potting mix as the plant needs it 24/7. And we call that a wicking garden bed, where if you've ever had a dishcloth in water, you might notice that it rises up out of the water as it travels up the dishcloth. That's called capillary action, it's called wicking, and it's how water can travel up from a water reservoir up through the potting mix and then be available to the plant or the seedlings or whatever you're growing in there whenever that plant needs it. And it just does it naturally. So as it's being drawn up from the bottom through capillary action, a plant reaches down with its roots and sucks it up through suction. So when suction meets wicking, you've got a very happy plant. So a wicking garden bed is a containerised, sealed system that is perched above the water in the soil, so that we're holding that where the plants are for later. Because when it rains, we get a lot of excess rain in our urban environments, and a wicking garden bed captures that in its space for later reuse. So it's very climate adaptive. We can get through a lot of heat waves, and in some cases we can get our plants to survive for weeks at a time in the one containerised system. Let's look at a wicking garden bed. Its elements are: there's a sealed container, there's a water reservoir in the base, which is generally rock, then there's a geotextile layer to separate the rock and the water from the potting mix, then we put our potting mix on top, and then we plant in that, and the water wicks up through capillary action into the potting mix to allow the plants to grow. That's how a wicking garden bed works, or a self-watering pot plant works. There are some advances now where these wicking garden beds have a water reservoir with cones and an air gap between the water and the potting mix, so that we can have free draining and wicking at the same time. And that prevents root rot. You don't want root rot in a container because it goes pretty smelly actually. So by getting a little bit of oxygen, you allow the water to move up through the potting mix, you allow the potting mix to breathe, and I like oxygen and so do plants. So they like to breathe too. Allowing them to breathe gets it much healthier. Allowing the plants to breathe lets them grow more optimally. And so you're going to get the best out of your garden bed if you've got a wicking garden bed that can breathe.
That's fantastic information, Marc. So Marc, what's some advice for our audience in creating their own urban garden bed?
Megan, setting up your own urban garden is actually quite easy. With a wicking garden bed, for example, you can avoid losing all your water, you can avoid having roots come into it from your next door neighbour's trees. You can actually make it very ergonomic by getting it up off the ground and having that raised garden bed so that you're not bending and hurting your back when you're watering or tending to your garden. You can set up an urban farm really quickly these days by having a connectable modular garden bed system that takes the hard work out of gardening. Imagine coming home on a hot day and then you see your garden bed just wilting and dying because you haven't been there to water it. Well, a wicking garden bed solves that. A wicking garden bed gives the plants exactly what it needs 24/7. So certain types of plants can access water all the time versus others that don't like a lot of water can just take what they need, and just more comes up naturally through a wicking garden bed.
Wow, that's fantastic information there, Marc. Thank you. If you'd like to know more about Marc and the innovative systems that make gardening easier, go to his webpage on our website, healthwellbeingandlifestyle.com.au, and after the break we'll have another interesting guest and another interesting topic. After the break, breathwork expert and life coach Christine Hart-Savage will be talking about reversing stress and burnout. Welcome back. And our next guest is breathwork and life coach Christine Hart-Savage, and the topic we'll be discussing today is reversing stress and burnout. Welcome, Christine.
Thank you for having me again, Megan.
Christine, can you describe stress and burnout for us?
They're two different things. So stress is something that builds up inside your body. So we often don't know we're stressed. So we go out into the world and something happens that we don't like or we're uncomfortable about it. And instead of allowing that emotion or expressing ourselves well, we tend to go into a little bit of shock and hold our breath a little bit, and whatever's going on at the time, that emotion we're feeling, the thoughts that we're having, when we hold our breath, it gets trapped inside the body. So then we go home, and the next morning we get up, we go back out into life, and we have some other stressful things happen, and it starts to accumulate in the body. So stress literally builds inside us, it builds in the body. And the cells, the cellular memory holds it. And if we think of stress as an energy, so we've got life force or energy flowing through us, and every time we have a stress moment, it's like that part of that energy becomes crystallized. It becomes like a little marble that is blocked inside the body. So that builds up. So in the end, we can feel like the stress has got to such a point that we are a pressure cooker. And it's incredibly uncomfortable is a very light word for it. It is terrifying. So the stress builds up in the body. That is burnout. So burnout is when the stress keeps building and building and building and building and building to the point where you are really full. That is burnout. Now that's very serious, because if we don't do something about burnout or stress at that point, we end up getting sick. It takes us into a state of not being able to cope with the smallest things. And the other thing that can happen is when someone's really at burnout or breakdown point, as I call it, we're so reactive. It's like, it just comes up, and these bursts, these outbursts take us over. So we're very emotionally charged. So we need to bring that down too, because not only is it not good for our health, it's no good for the people around us.
Christine, can burnout happen to anyone?
Most definitely. The thing with burnout too, strong people keep soldiering on. So we feel some stress, some pressure, and you wake up, you say, okay, you push it over there, and you just get on with the day. Next day, the following day, and as it's building and building, you get to a point where it's almost impossible to keep going, but strong people do. They keep pushing through it. I can do this, and they don't get help. What I've found is that it's across the board. It doesn't matter whether it is a younger person, a middle-aged person, an older person, whether these people have been, they're trained academically. I find that the people that I see mostly for this burnout, that when they've got to this point where they really are not coping, are people that run their own businesses, lawyers, doctors as well, and people that really are very professional because they keep going and going and going. Even university professors I've had, they don't know where to turn, they don't know what to do. And the other thing with this, when we can have burnout or really strong anxiety and panic attacks, it's often people in the media. So people that are on television that are really confident and they're great. You would never think that they're suffering from burnout or panic. Also people like radio jocks that are on radio, that are out there, that are funny, that are speaking to people. On a break, they might have to run into the toilet and try and get their breath because they're having panic attacks. So it can affect anybody. It doesn't matter where they're from, who they are, what they do in life. Burnout is a build-up of stress in the body and the mind.
Christine, is there anything you recommend that people can do if they believe they're experiencing burnout, or tips and tricks on how to prevent burnout?
Most definitely. Look, burnout's one of the big things that I work with because it's close to my heart. Because in my life, I got to that point of breakdown. I went through a breakdown, and this was through a marriage, second marriage. And in this particular relationship, I kept trying, and this is what strong people do, trying to make it work, trying more. Over-giving is what I call it. And you give more and you give more, because if you give more, of course, it's going to make things better. But we've lost ourselves when we do that. When we have burnout, the stress is built up to such a point that in the end, you have separated off from yourself. So you're disconnecting from who you are. You're disconnecting from yourself. Now, when that happens, you're also disconnecting from the people in your life. You're disconnecting from the world, basically. So it's a very lonely journey. And it's because we're blocked. We've got all of this stress in the way. So what we need to do, when you get to this point of burnout, we need to do a deeper type of releasing. So there's two things that I would suggest people do. One is something like a deeper sort of breathwork therapy. So that's a deeper process of breathing where it takes you into an altered state of consciousness. You go beyond your conscious mind, and your body relaxes like crazy, because as you're breathing, your energy field is opening up, opening up, opening up. That means every cell inside you is taking on new energy and oxygen, and that is also unfolding and opening up, and all the blockages caught in those cells then start to be released. So the person will experience different tensions and tingling and vibration and maybe emotion coming up. And every time they do this type of session, they're releasing more of that tension. So that means they're reconnecting with themselves again, bit by bit. It's a very powerful way to release what you have built up inside the cellular level of the body. Our bodies are so intelligent. Our minds are intelligent, but we're quite blocked. The thing that I find is that we're fragmented. So the mind is saying one thing, the emotions are something else, the body's in tension, and the soul or the spirit we're all out of whack. When you do deep breathwork therapy, it brings you more into alignment. That's why people feel this incredible calm come over them towards the end of the session, because they're lining up between their spirit or soul, their mind, their emotions, and their body. And when they leave, they can go out into the world feeling much more relaxed and much more connected to themselves and in balance. So that type of therapy is what people need to start releasing that deeper cellular level of burnout. We need to really reverse that burnout. And then as well as that, I would suggest people have a daily program. And they definitely need to learn to breathe correctly, so they need to find a good breathing coach. And I know one of those. And also have a meditation program as well. So that might sound like a lot, but it's not.
Thanks, Christine, for such wonderful stories and wonderful information.
Thank you, Megan. It's always a pleasure to be here.
If you'd like to know more about reversing stress and burnout and Christine Hart-Savage, go to her webpage on our website, healthwellbeingandlifestyle.com.au. And that's it for today, and we'll say bye-bye until next week.
If you'd like to know more about our show, please like our Facebook page and also subscribe to our YouTube channel.